There are moments in life that change you forever. A quiet room, an aging parent sitting alone, a look in their eyes that feels different, not sick, not dramatic, just different. Most families don't notice it at first. They think, it's just old age. They're tired. They're becoming quiet. But sometimes, what looks like normal aging is actually the body and mind slowly preparing to leave. This video is not meant to scare you. It's meant to open your eyes. Because many elderly people begin showing subtle, silent signs months or even a year before the end of life, and families often realize it only after it's too late. These signs are not predictions. They are not guarantees. They are patterns observed by caregivers, doctors, and families across generations. Patterns of withdrawal, patterns of detachment, patterns of quiet acceptance. If you've ever felt that something about an elderly loved one feels off, this video may explain why. Today, we are talking about the silent signs elderly people often show before the final chapter of life. Watch this video till the end, because understanding these signs doesn't bring fear. It brings presence. It brings compassion. And sometimes, it brings closure. If this video helps you see life differently, like the video, subscribe to the channel, because the content here isn't about entertainment. It's about truth, awareness, and emotional intelligence. Now listen carefully, because some signs speak only once. 1. A sudden withdrawal from the world. One of the most misunderstood signs near the end of life has nothing to do with pain, illness, or visible weakness. It begins quietly, almost politely. An elderly person who once filled the room with stories, opinions, complaints, and laughter slowly begins to disappear while still being physically present. They are still sitting there, still breathing, still alive, but something essential has shifted inside them. The spark that once reached outward toward the world begins to turn inward. They stop asking questions not because they don't care, but because curiosity no longer feels necessary. They stop arguing not because they agree, but because winning no longer matters. They stop reacting not because they are numb, but because emotional noise starts to feel heavy. What once triggered them now passes by unnoticed. Conversations happen around them, but they participate less and less, as if watching life instead of living inside it. Families often mistake this change for depression or loneliness. They say they've become negative, or they're not the same anymore. But here's the uncomfortable truth. This withdrawal is often not sadness. It is detachment, a slow, natural pulling away from the world that once demanded so much energy. The elderly person isn't running from life, they are gently releasing it. You may notice they prefer sitting alone, even when others are around. Not because they feel excluded, but because silence feels safer than conversation. Silence doesn't ask anything from them. Silence doesn't demand explanations. Silence allows them to simply exist. They watch more than they speak. They listen without responding. And when they do speak, their words feel measured, softer, almost final. There is often a strange calm in their eyes during this phase. Not excitement, not fear. A calm that can feel unsettling to those who love them. It's the calm of someone who no longer feels the need to prove anything, no longer feels the need to fix relationships, correct people, or fight battles that once consumed them. The world begins to feel complete, not perfect, but finished. In extreme cases, they may emotionally withdraw even from people they deeply love. This hurts families the most. Children wonder, why don't they want to talk to me anymore? But what's happening is not rejection, it's preparation. A subconscious turning inward, where emotional ties loosen not because love disappears, but because holding on begins to feel tiring. Caregivers often notice this before anyone else. The elderly person responds politely, but briefly. Eye contact shortens. Conversations end quickly. It's as if they are conserving something precious: energy, attention, presence for reasons they may not even fully understand themselves. This stage is not dramatic. There are no speeches, no tears, just a gradual fading from the noise of the world. And families often realize the meaning of this silence only after the room becomes permanently quiet. If you are witnessing this in someone you love, understand this. Their withdrawal is not a failure of connection. It is a sign that their inner journey is becoming more important than the outer world. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is not force conversation, but sit with them in that silence and let them feel seen without being pulled back. Because this silence is not emptiness. It is closure forming. 2. Losing interest in future plans. One of the quietest signs that something deep is changing inside an elderly person is the moment they stop living forward, not in a dramatic way, not with sadness or despair, but with a soft, almost peaceful withdrawal from the idea of tomorrow. The future, once full of plans, worries, expectations, and what-ifs, slowly stops calling to them. They no longer talk about next year. No more, when I get better. No more, after the holidays we should. Even simple plans like short trips, family gatherings, or celebrations feel unnecessary. Not unwanted, just irrelevant. The calendar loses its power over them. Birthdays become especially telling. While family members insist on celebrations, the elderly person often responds with indifference. It's just another day. They don't want cake, gifts, or attention. It's not because they feel unloved. It's because marking time no longer feels meaningful when the mind is quietly stepping outside of it. When asked about the future, their answers sound calm, almost unsettling in their simplicity. Whatever happens is fine. I'm okay with how things are. I've lived enough. To younger ears, these words can sound like surrender. But this isn't hopelessness. It's something far deeper and far rarer. It's acceptance, a state where the mind stops fighting the passage of time and begins to loosen its grip on it. In earlier years, the future was a place of urgency. Things needed to be done. Goals needed to be met. Problems needed solving. But now, that urgency fades. The elderly person is no longer trying to outrun time or negotiate with it. They are quietly making peace with it. In more extreme cases, they may even discourage others from making plans around them. Don't worry about me. Do what's best for you. Families often interpret this as emotional distance, but it is often an act of release. They don't want to anchor others to a future they themselves are no longer holding on to. Psychologically, this shift is profound. The mind, which once stretched forward endlessly, begins to fold inward. The present moment becomes enough. There is less anticipation, and with it, less anxiety. What remains is a strange stillness, where days blend together, not in confusion, but in calm neutrality. Caregivers often notice that elderly people in this stage are surprisingly unbothered by uncertainty. Medical appointments, test results, even serious conversations about health no longer provoke strong reactions. There is no denial, no panic, just a quiet, grounded response. We'll see. This can be deeply unsettling for family members who are still living forward, still planning, still hoping, still fearing. But for the elderly person, the mind has already begun to step outside the race of time. They are no longer measuring life by what comes next. They are measuring it by what already was. And here is the part most people don't realize until it's over. When someone stops planning for the future, it doesn't mean they've given up on life. It means life has stopped demanding proof from them. They no longer need to justify their existence with plans, productivity, or milestones. The mind slowly releases its grip on time. And in that release, there is not fear, there is peace. 3. A deep need to give away possessions. One day, it begins without warning. An elderly person reaches into a drawer they haven't opened in years. They take out a ring, a watch, a folded piece of cloth, and they hand it to someone with a calm that feels almost rehearsed. This should go to you. You'll need this more than me. Keep this safe. At first, it looks like generosity, thoughtfulness, even kindness. Families smile. They thank them. They don't question it. But something about the moment feels heavier than a gift exchange. The object isn't being given away lightly. It's being placed as if the person is carefully deciding where pieces of their life should land once they're gone. This behavior is rarely random. Elderly people don't suddenly give away possessions they don't care about. They give away the things that mattered. Jewelry worn for decades, clothes tied to identity, objects soaked in memory. Each item carries a story, and each handoff is deliberate. In many cases, they don't say why they're giving it away. They don't announce anything dramatic. There's no speech, just a quiet certainty, a tone that doesn't invite argument. If someone refuses the item, they insist gently but firmly, because for them, this isn't optional. It's necessary. This is not generosity. It's preparation. Psychologically, possessions represent identity, who we were, what we valued, what we survived. When an elderly person begins giving these things away, it often means they no longer feel the need to hold on to identity through objects. The attachment loosens. Ownership becomes unnecessary. The self begins to detach from material anchors. In extreme cases, they may even give away things family members didn't expect, items assumed to be untouchable. Wedding rings, heirlooms, personal letters. And when asked why, their answer is simple, almost unsettling in its calm. I don't need it anymore. That sentence carries weight because it's rarely about the object. It's about the self. Families often feel discomfort during this phase, a quiet panic, a feeling they can't explain. They joke it off. Why are you acting like this? But deep down, something registers. The giving feels final, not emotional but intentional. This is how some elderly people say goodbye without saying the words. They don't want emotional scenes. They don't want tears. They don't want to burden anyone with heavy conversations. So they do what feels practical, controlled, and meaningful. They distribute their life while they still can. Caregivers and hospice workers often recognize this pattern immediately. They know that when someone starts giving away their most valued possessions, it's often a sign that the mind has already begun transitioning. The person is organizing closure, reducing unfinished business, making sure nothing important is left behind. And perhaps the most painful part for families is this. The elderly person often feels peace during this process, a strange relief, as if each item given away lightens something inside them, as if the world is slowly being put in order. If you've ever received such a gift and felt a knot in your chest, trust that feeling. It's not imagination. It's intuition recognizing something real. Because when possessions lose their grip, it often means the person is preparing to let go of more than objects. They are quietly placing the final pieces of their life into the hands of others. And sometimes that is the most honest goodbye there is. 4. Talking about the past more than the present. At some point, the present begins to lose its weight. Conversations about today, news, problems, plans no longer hold their attention. Instead, the elderly person drifts backward, not accidentally, not confused, intentionally. Their words begin to carry the dust of old roads, old rooms, old faces. They start telling stories you've heard before, names you thought were forgotten, places that no longer exist. Sometimes the same story returns again and again, unchanged, almost rehearsed, and families often grow impatient. You've already told us this. They assume it's memory loss, decline, confusion. But this isn't forgetting. This is remembering with purpose. Psychologists call it life review, a natural process where the mind revisits the past to make sense of the whole journey. The elderly person is not lost in memory. They are organizing it, sorting experiences, revisiting choices, quietly asking questions they may never say out loud. Did my life matter? Did I love enough? Was it worth it? The past becomes vivid in ways the present no longer is. They remember the smell of a childhood home more clearly than what they ate this morning. They recall a long-dead friend's laughter more vividly than yesterday's conversation. This isn't decline, it's focus shifting inward. In extreme cases, they speak as if they are standing inside those memories. Their voice softens. Their eyes glaze, not in confusion, but in immersion. They may smile suddenly, or fall silent mid-story, overwhelmed by emotion they don't explain. These moments aren't accidents. They are emotional checkpoints. They often return to unresolved moments, missed chances, old regrets, long forgiven mistakes. Sometimes they bring up painful memories with no warning, as if needing to say them out loud one last time. Not for forgiveness, not for sympathy, but for release. Families often feel confused by this. They try to pull the conversation back to the present. That was so long ago. But for the elderly person, time has folded in on itself. The past no longer feels distant, it feels immediate, essential, unfinished. This stage can become even more intense when they begin reconnecting emotionally with people from their past. They ask about old friends, old relatives, people no one has mentioned in decades. Sometimes they express a sudden need to apologize, or to say thank you, or simply to remember someone's name aloud once more before it disappears forever. Caregivers notice that during this phase, elderly people often seem mentally busy, even while sitting quietly, as if something important is happening internally, and it is. The mind is creating narrative closure, a beginning, a middle, and an end that finally makes sense together. There is something deeply human and deeply painful about watching this happen, because while the elderly person is looking backward, the family is still looking forward. Two timelines moving in opposite directions, quietly missing each other. But here is the truth most people don't realize until it's too late. When an elderly person talks about the past, they are not stuck there. They are gathering themselves, making peace with who they were, deciding what their life ultimately meant. And sometimes, when they repeat a story one last time, it's not because they forgot they already told it. It's because they are saying goodbye to that version of themselves. So if you hear the same memory again, listen, because that memory may be closing its final chapter. 5. Reduced appetite and sleep patterns. Long before the end arrives, the body begins to whisper what the mouth never says. It doesn't announce it loudly. It doesn't panic. It simply slows down. An elderly person who once enjoyed meals now pushes food around the plate. A few bites, then nothing. "I'm not hungry," they say gently. Families worry. They insist. They bargain. "Just eat a little more." Food becomes an emotional battlefield because, for the living, eating means staying. But the body has its own wisdom. Hunger fades not out of illness, but out of necessity. Digestion takes energy. Desire takes effort. And when the body begins conserving what little energy it has left, appetite is one of the first things to go. Not suddenly, gradually, quietly. Sleep changes too, but not in ways people expect. They don't sleep deeply. They don't sleep long. Instead, sleep becomes fragmented. Short naps, long periods of stillness with eyes closed. Awake at odd hours, staring into the dark, calm and alert for reasons no one can explain. Families assume discomfort, pain, anxiety. Doctors run tests. Everything looks normal. And that answer feels wrong because something feels different. Something is slipping, even though no diagnosis explains it. Energy disappears next. Not dramatic exhaustion, just a soft fading of strength. Walking becomes slower. Sitting feels heavy. Simple movements feel optional. Not painful, just unnecessary. The elderly person may say, "I'm tired," but it's not the tiredness of effort. It's the tiredness of completion. In more extreme moments, they lose interest even in foods they once loved. Favorite dishes bring no reaction. Sweet or salty, nothing registers. And when families feel hurt by this, it's important to understand. The body is no longer asking for pleasure. It is preparing for rest. This stage is one of the hardest for families because it triggers fear. Feeding someone feels like love. Sleep feels like survival. When both begin to fade, the instinct is to fight harder. More food, more encouragement, more noise. But the elderly person often responds with quiet resistance, not stubbornness, but instinct. The body knows how to let go more gently than the mind does. Caregivers often describe this phase as a turning inward. The elderly person spends more time resting, but not restlessly. Their breathing slows. Their movements become deliberate. Their presence becomes softer. It can feel like they are slowly slipping out of the rhythm of daily life. And here is the part few people talk about openly. This process is not always painful for the person experiencing it. Often, there is no suffering, no fear, just a gradual disengagement. The body begins to shut down systems that are no longer needed. For the family, it feels unbearable to watch someone stop eating, stop sleeping normally, stop moving the way they used to. It feels like watching someone fade while still being there. But for the body, this is not collapse. It is conservation. Energy is no longer being spent on growth, repair, or pleasure. It is being preserved for something else, something final. The body is quietly letting go. And sometimes, the most painful thing for those left behind is realizing that there is nothing to fix, only something to witness. If you've ever sat beside an elderly loved one and felt helpless watching them refuse food or drift in and out of sleep, know this: what you are seeing is not giving up. It is the body completing its journey, slowly, silently, and on its own terms. 6. Emotional calm after years of struggle. One of the most misunderstood changes near the end of life is not decline, it's peace. An elderly person who spent a lifetime anxious, reactive, quick to anger, or endlessly worried suddenly becomes still. The sharp edges soften. The tension leaves their voice. Arguments that once erupted now dissolve before they begin. Where there was once resistance, there is quiet acceptance. Families are often relieved at first. They're finally relaxed. But something about this calm feels different, deeper, final. They forgive easily now. Old grudges lose their grip. Words that once would have cut deep barely register. Insults pass through them like wind through an open window. They no longer feel the need to defend themselves, correct others, or assert control. The fight is gone. This is not weakness. This is resolution. For decades, their nervous system lived in survival mode, responding, reacting, protecting, holding on. Now, slowly, it powers down. The body no longer prepares for battle. The mind no longer scans for threat. The world stops feeling like something to push against. You may notice their smile changes. It becomes softer, slower, less performative. It doesn't seek approval. It doesn't demand a response. It simply exists. Sometimes they smile at nothing at all, at a memory, a thought, or a feeling they don't explain. In extreme cases, this calm can feel unsettling to loved ones who remember the struggle. Why don't they care anymore? They wonder. But the truth is, they care differently now. Without urgency, without fear, without attachment to outcome. Caregivers often recognize this phase immediately. They describe it as a quiet acceptance, a sense that the person has stopped wrestling with their own life. The internal arguments fall silent. Regrets loosen. Even pain, when present, is met with less resistance. This calm often arrives after years of emotional storms, after disappointments, betrayals, losses, a lifetime of holding things together. And when it finally comes, it feels earned, as if the soul has said, "Enough. I'm done fighting." What's heartbreaking is that families sometimes misread this piece as improvement, as recovery, as hope. They think the struggle has passed and life is returning to normal. But this calm is not a comeback. It is completion. The inner battles, the ones no one else could see, are over. The mind no longer needs to rehearse old wounds or defend old identities. There is nothing left to prove, nothing left to protect. And in some of the quietest moments, you can feel it. A deep stillness radiating from them, a presence that feels heavy and light at the same time, as if they are already standing with one foot beyond the noise of this world. If you witness this calm in someone you love, don't rush to disrupt it. Don't demand reactions. Don't pull them back into old arguments or unfinished conversations. Sit with them in that peace. Because this calm is not emptiness, it is rest. And rest, after a lifetime of struggle, is the final victory. 7. Speaking in symbols or indirect goodbyes. Near the end of life, some elderly people don't say goodbye. They don't announce anything. They don't gather everyone into a room. They don't cry or ask to be remembered. Instead, they speak in sentences that sound ordinary, almost casual. "I've lived a full life. Take care of each other. I'm proud of you." At the time, these words don't stop the room. They don't trigger alarm. Families nod. They smile. They respond politely. the conversation moves on. Only later, sometimes much later, does the weight of those words return. Because those sentences were not conversation. They were closures. These are what psychologists sometimes call emotional will statements, final messages that carry meaning beyond logic. The elderly person isn't predicting anything. They aren't being dramatic. They are doing something much more precise. They are putting emotional affairs in order. What makes these moments so painful is how calm they are. No trembling voice, no tears, just intention, a steady tone, eye contact that lingers slightly longer than usual, a softness that feels unfamiliar. They don't say, "I love you," in a desperate way. They say it as a statement of fact, something already settled, something complete. In extreme cases, these indirect goodbyes come disguised as advice. Be kind to your mother. Don't fight over small things. Stay together. To the listener, it sounds like wisdom. To the speaker, it's release. They are passing responsibility forward quietly, stepping out of the role they've carried for decades. Sometimes the words feel oddly timed. There is no crisis, no illness discussed, no reason for such finality. That's why families miss it. The mind doesn't register it as a goodbye because it doesn't sound like one. But the body often knows. There's a pause after the sentence, a silence that feels heavier than normal, a sense that something important was just said without explanation. Elderly people who do this often avoid emotional reactions afterward. If someone responds strongly, they gently deflect. They change the subject because the purpose wasn't to create emotion, it was to complete something internally. Caregivers and hospice workers recognize this pattern instantly. They know that when someone begins speaking in symbolic closure, summarizing life, expressing pride, emphasizing unity, it often means the person has already accepted what's coming. The goodbye has already happened inside them. And here is the part families struggle with the most. These words are rarely repeated. Once said, they don't come back because they weren't casual, they were final. After the person is gone, these sentences replay endlessly in the minds of loved ones. Suddenly, they sound different. Suddenly, they carry a clarity that wasn't there before, and the realization hits hard. They were telling us, we just didn't know how to hear it yet. If you ever hear an elderly loved one speak this way slowly, calmly, intentionally, don't rush past it. Don't interrupt. Don't minimize it. You don't need to panic. You don't need to respond perfectly. Just be present. Because sometimes the most meaningful goodbye is not a moment, it's a sentence. And sometimes those sentences are all that remain. 8. A strong desire for simplicity. As the end of life draws closer, the world begins to feel too loud, not painfully loud, just unnecessary. An elderly person who once tolerated noise, crowds, conversations, and constant movement slowly begins to withdraw from it all. They don't complain. They don't argue. They simply choose less. Fewer people in the room, shorter conversations, softer voices, a slower pace. They no longer want gatherings. They no longer want celebrations. Too many people drains them not emotionally, but physically. The effort to respond, to listen, to engage, begins to feel heavy. Even love, when it arrives loudly, becomes exhausting. They start preferring silence. Not awkward silence, not lonely silence, but a silence that feels safe. Silence doesn't demand explanations. Silence doesn't pull them into the future or the past. Silence lets them rest inside the present moment without being disturbed. For many elderly people, silence becomes the final form of peace. Nature begins to feel more comforting than conversation. Sitting near a window, watching trees move, feeling sunlight on the skin, listening to birds. These simple experiences replace entertainment, news, or stimulation. The world is no longer something to consume, it is something to observe. Familiar faces matter more than new ones. They don't want introductions. They don't want strangers. They want the people who already know them without explanations, without effort. People who don't require performance. People who understand pauses. Complexity becomes unbearable. Long stories, complicated problems, emotional drama, fast decisions. All of it feels intrusive. The mind no longer wants to juggle. It wants stillness, order, predictability. Even their physical surroundings change. They may want fewer objects around them, fewer clothes, fewer decorations. Rooms feel better when they are uncluttered, clean, open, not because they are organizing, but because excess begins to feel like weight. In extreme moments, they may ask for things that seem insignificant to others: a specific chair, a specific blanket, a certain corner of the room. These small preferences matter deeply because simplicity brings control when everything else feels out of reach. Families often misinterpret this desire for simplicity as withdrawal or depression. They try to reintroduce stimulation, visitors, activities, noise. But the elderly person gently resists, not out of sadness, but wisdom. They are no longer seeking more from life. They are seeking less. Caregivers recognize this phase as a turning inward. The person's world becomes smaller but richer, narrower but deeper. Everything unnecessary begins to fall away. What remains is what truly comforts them. And here is the part that hurts the most to understand. This simplification is not about giving up. It is about settling. The mind is preparing for stillness. The body is choosing peace over stimulation. The soul, whether you believe in it or not, is reducing noise. If you sit with someone in this phase, you'll notice something profound. There is less urgency, less distraction, less tension. Time feels slower around them. And in that slowness, something sacred appears. Presence, not conversation, not entertainment, just being there. Because at the end of life, complexity no longer feels like richness. Simplicity does. And sometimes, the greatest comfort you can offer is not words, not activity, not effort, but quiet companionship. Just sitting, just breathing, just letting the silence be enough. As we conclude, not every elderly person who shows these signs is nearing death. And not everyone nearing death shows all these signs. This video is about awareness, not prediction. The real message is this: pay attention, be present, say what matters now, not later. Because the end rarely announces itself loudly. It whispers,